My wife served me divorce papers at the hospital. I showed her lawyer my hidden recording. At 64, I was lying in a cardiac ward with tubes snaking out of my arms, fighting for my next breath, when the woman I'd loved for 30 years walked in to finish what the heart attack started. She didn't bring flowers. She brought a predator in a power suit and a stack of legal documents that said I was worth more to her dead than alive. Before I even tell you what happened, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If you have, you'll feel this story deep in your soul. And if you know that kind of pain, hit subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this remind us that sometimes silence and strength are the best revenge. I was a construction man. I spent 4 decades building foundations that could withstand hurricanes, yet I never noticed the rot inside my own front door. I had worked 41 years, owned my home outright, and had just suffered a massive coronary when this happened. The hospital room felt small, the air thick with the smell of floor wax and Naima's expensive floral perfume, a scent I used to love, but now made me want to gag. She stood at the foot of my bed, looking impeccable, not a hair out of place. No tears, no worry, just a cold, calculating gaze that made my skin crawl. Beside her was Ms. Imani Sterling, a lawyer known in this city for cleaning out husbands. Elijah, Naima said, her voice as flat as a dial tone. We need to be realistic. The business is failing, your health is gone, and I can't be anchored to a sinking ship. Ms. Sterling stepped forward, clicking her pen. It sounded like a bone snapping. Mr. Vance, we have the dissolution papers here. Given your current condition and the debts we've identified in the company, Naima is seeking the house and the bulk of the liquid assets. It's for your own good, really. You won't have to worry about the bills. They spoke about my future like I was already dead. I was still sitting there, my heart monitor rhythmic and steady, while they carved up my life like a Sunday roast. They thought I was a broken old man, too weak to hold a pen, let alone a grudge. Naima even had the audacity to smirk when the lawyer mentioned the debts. What she didn't know was that while I was building houses, I was also building a cage. And I had spent the last year making sure the door would lock from the inside. I didn't say a word. I just felt for the small, hard shape of the digital recorder hidden under my pillow. To understand why this hurts so much, you have to understand what we were before the greed took over. I met Naima back in '88 at a community fair. She was a brilliant finance manager with an eye for detail, and I was just a guy with a hammer and a dream. We were a team, or so I believed, for nearly 3 decades. I poured every drop of sweat into Vance and Sons construction. I wanted to leave something for Marcus and Simone, a legacy that meant the Vance name stood for hard work and honesty. While I was out on the job sites, navigating blueprints and city permits, Naima handled the books. She managed the household with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. I trusted her with every penny, every investment, every retirement fund. I was too busy building our life to notice she was busy dismantling it. We were a solid, respected family. Or at least, that's the image we projected to the world. We had the big house, the unwavering faith, and the reputation for being the couple that made it work. But looking back, I see the red flags I chose to ignore because I was too proud to admit my marriage was failing. The first hint of trouble wasn't a loud argument. It was a quiet withdrawal. About 5 years ago, after our youngest, Simone, headed off to her final year of college, the woman I knew started to vanish. Naima became distant. She was the vice president of regional operations for a major bank, so when she started taking late-night work calls and spending weekends at conferences, I told myself I was being a supportive husband. I told myself her career was just peaking. But my gut, that instinct that tells a builder when a load-bearing wall is about to give way, started screaming. The house felt different. The air was cold even when the heat was on. Naima started looking at me not as a partner, but as a nuisance, an obstacle. Then came the money issues. Just small things at first, a utility bill that seemed double what it should be, or a clerical error on a credit card statement. Naima always had a quick, professional explanation. She'd use big financial terms to make me feel like I was just a simple tradesman who didn't understand high-level accounting. "Eli, don't worry your head about the spreadsheets," she'd say with a patronizing pat on my hand. "I've got it all under control." She did have it under control. She was controlling the slow bleed of everything I had ever earned. I was the one out in the sun, laying the bricks, while she was in the shadows, pulling them out one by one. I was building a kingdom, and she was already inviting another king to sit on my throne. The thing about a house falling down is that it doesn't usually start with the roof caving in. It starts with a tiny crack in the basement that you ignore because you're too busy painting the living room. That was my life 5 years ago. I was so focused on the outward appearance of the Vance family that I missed the moment the foundation began to rot. Naima had always been a sharp woman, but she started becoming someone I didn't recognize. The warmth in her voice was replaced by a professional frost. It's a lonely feeling when you're laying in bed next to your wife of 30 years and you feel like you're sleeping next to a stranger. Her work calls started happening at 10 o'clock at night. She'd walk into the other room and lock the door, her voice dropping to a low murmur that I couldn't quite catch. When I'd ask her who was calling that late, she'd roll her eyes and sigh like I was a nagging child. "It's the London office, Eli. Or the West Coast team. Not everyone works 9 to 5 with a lunch pail like you do." That was the gaslighting. She was using my own hard work to make me feel small, like my simple life was the reason I didn't understand her complex world. I started noticing she was dressing differently too. She wasn't just buying clothes. She was buying an identity. Designer bags that cost more than a new set of power tools, and jewelry I knew I hadn't bought her. When I questioned a particularly expensive gold bracelet, she didn't even blink. "It was a bonus from the bank, Eli. A reward for my extra efforts." I wanted to believe her. I really did. You don't spend 3 decades building a life with someone just to assume they're a liar. But that cold knot in my gut was getting tighter. I'd see her smiling at her phone in the kitchen, only for the smile to vanish the second I walked into the room. She was there, but she wasn't mine anymore. The isolation tactics were subtle. She started telling our friends I was slowing down or getting a bit forgetful because of my age. She was setting the stage, making people believe that I was losing my edge so that when the time came to move against me, nobody would take my word over hers. It's a special kind of cruelty to make a man doubt his own mind just so you can steal his money. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun go down, and realizing I was being pushed out of my own life. I was the one who paid for the porch, the house, and the land it sat on, but I felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. I didn't have proof yet, just a feeling. But in my line of work, if you feel a draft, it means there's a hole in the wall. I just hadn't found the hole yet. The moment the suspicion turned into a full-blown alarm was when I decided to expand Vance & Sons. I had a vision for a new housing development, something that would finally secure Marcus and Simone's future. I needed a significant loan to get the materials and labor lined up. Since Naima handled every cent of our personal and business finances, I sat her down with the projections. I expected her to be proud. I expected the woman who once crunched numbers for fun to dive in and help me secure the best rates. Instead, she looked at my plans with a look of pure disgust. "Eli, this is ridiculous," she said, tossing the folders onto the table like they were trash. "The market is too volatile. Your projections are a fantasy. We can't leverage our assets for this. It's too risky for a man your age." It was a direct blow to my pride. I had built this company from a single hammer and a beat-up truck, and here she was, telling me I didn't know my own business. She became evasive when I asked to see our combined asset statements. She claimed the bank's portal was down or that she hadn't finished the quarterly audit. It was the first time she'd ever flat-out denied me access to my own information. "You've been working too hard," she said, her voice dropping into that fake, soothing tone that felt like a slap. "You're stressed, and it's making you impulsive. Let me handle the money. You just focus on whatever it is you do at the sites. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen." I didn't listen to her. My pride wouldn't let me. I went to my own business bank, the one I'd used for small payroll needs, and asked for a look at my equity. The manager there, a man I'd known for years, looked at me with a confused expression. "Eli," he said quietly, "I thought you knew. A large portion of your business collateral was shifted 6 months ago. The signatures are all there. Your wife has power of attorney, right?" My heart stopped. I hadn't signed off on any shift. I had trusted her with that power of attorney for emergencies, not for restructuring behind my back. When I tried to push for more details, the paper trail got messy. It led to accounts I didn't recognize and consulting fees that made no sense. I went home that night and looked at Naima while she ate dinner. She looked so calm, so innocent, sipping her wine and complaining about her day at the bank. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a distant wife. I was dealing with a thief who shared my bed. The seed of doubt had grown into a forest, and I knew I had to start looking for the truth before she buried me under it. The truth didn't come to me in a dream. It came through a trembling voice over a static-filled phone line. It was a Tuesday evening, and Naima was supposedly 300 miles away at a leadership summit in Charlotte. I was sitting in my recliner, trying to make sense of a bank statement that looked like it had been written in a foreign language, when my sister-in-law, Maeve, called. Maeve is Naima's older sister, but they couldn't be more different. Where Naima is polished and guarded, Maeve is a straight shooter, a woman who believes a lie is a debt you can never pay off. She didn't even say hello. "Eli," she whispered, her voice tight with a mix of fear and anger. "I'm at the Gilded Lily. You know, that fancy steakhouse over on 4th Street. I frowned, looking at the clock. "Maeve, what are you doing there? And why are you whispering?" "I'm here for my neighbor's retirement dinner," she said, her breath hitching. "Eli, I just saw Naima. She didn't see me, but I saw her. She isn't in Charlotte. She's sitting in a corner booth at the back of this restaurant. And Eli, she isn't alone." My stomach dropped like I'd just stepped off a roof. The room seemed to tilt. I clutched the armrest of my chair, my knuckles turning white. "Who is she with, Maeve?" "It's Councilman Dwight Hawkins," she said, the name hitting me like a physical blow. "They aren't just talking business, Eli. They're leaning in, holding hands across the table." He just kissed her cheek. "I've never seen her look at you the way she's looking at him." Dwight Hawkins. I knew the name. Everyone in town did. He was a charming city official who Naima had praised for years, calling him a visionary leader who understood the bank's needs. I had shaken that man's hand at community events. I had thanked him for his service to our city. And all while, he was helping my wife destroy our family. Maeve hung up after promising to send me a photo if she could get a clear shot. I sat in the dark for hours, the silence of the house feeling like a heavy shroud. Every late night at the office, every weekend conference, and every extra effort Naima had mentioned flashed through my mind like a horror movie. She wasn't building a career. She was building a getaway plan. I felt like a fool. A 60-year-old man who had been played by the person he trusted most. The woman I had built a 30-year legacy with was currently sipping expensive wine with a politician while I sat at home wondering why our utility bills were so high. The rage started as a tiny spark in the pit of my stomach, a cold, focused heat. I realized then that I couldn't just be a husband anymore. I had to become a witness. I had to see the rot for myself, because if I didn't get proof, she would make me out to be the crazy one. I looked at the framed photos on the mantle, the kids' graduations, our anniversary in Hawaii, and I realized they were just props in a play I didn't know I was starring in. My life wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Naima and her visionary councilman. But as I sat there in the dark, I made a silent vow. She wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But I was the one who knew how to build things to last, and I was going to make sure her lies had nowhere to hide. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. Naima walked through the front door the next morning at 10 a.m., looking as fresh as a spring breeze. She had her travel suitcase in hand and a tired, practiced smile on her face. To anyone else, She looked like a hard-working executive returning from a grueling trip. To me, she looked like a predator returning to the den. "Oh, Eli," she sighed, dropping her keys on the counter. The traffic coming back from Charlotte was a nightmare. "I'm absolutely exhausted. I just want to take a hot bath and sleep for a week." I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching her. I didn't offer to take her bag. I didn't offer a hug. I just stared. "How was the summit, Naima? Did Councilman Hawkins enjoy the keynote speakers?" She froze for a split second, a micro-expression that only someone who had lived with her for 30 years would catch. Then, the mask slid right back into place. She laughed, a light, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. "Dwight. Was he there?" "I suppose he might have been, Eli. There were hundreds of people." "Why on earth are you asking about him?" "Because Maeve saw you with him," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "At the Gilded Lily. Last night. Right here in town. You weren't in Charlotte, Naima. You were 5 miles away, holding hands with a man who isn't your husband." What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation. Her eyes welled up with tears instantly. Her lip trembled. She didn't back down. She attacked. "Are you serious right now?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls I had painted myself. "You're listening to Maeve? My sister has been jealous of my success since we were children. She's always tried to sabotage me. And you, the man I've supported for 3 decades, you're going to take her word over mine." She paced the kitchen, waving her hands dramatically. "I was in Charlotte. If Maeve saw someone who looked like me, she was mistaken. Or she's lying to you because she hates seeing us happy. How could you even suggest this, Eli? After everything I do for this family? I'm the one managing the stress of the bank, the one keeping our finances afloat while you play around with your construction projects." It was brilliant. She turned her betrayal into my failure of trust. She used my age and my simple career as weapons to make me feel guilty for even questioning her. For a moment, a tiny, weak part of me wanted to apologize. I wanted to believe that Maeve was wrong, that I was just being a paranoid old man. But then I saw it. As she turned to walk away, a small, smug look crossed her face when she thought I wasn't looking. It was a look of victory. She thought she had won. She thought her Oscar-worthy performance had put me back in my place. "I'm going to my room," she snapped, not looking back. "And when you're ready to act like a husband again instead of a detective, maybe we can talk." I watched her go, the silence returning to the house. She didn't know that Maeve had sent the photo. It was blurry, but it was Naima. And it was Dwight. I realized that words were useless now. Naima was a professional liar, and she was better at it than I was. I couldn't talk my way to the truth. I had to document it. I looked at the decorative vase in the living room, a gift from her mother that I'd always hated. It was the perfect spot. From that moment on, the loving husband was gone. I was going to be the silent observer in my own home. I was going to let her perform, let her lie, and let her think she was the smartest person in the room. Because as any builder knows, the bigger they build the lie, the harder it hits the ground when you pull the plug. If you want to catch a predator, you have to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a hunter. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I'm a man of wood and nails. I didn't know the first thing about digital footprints or encrypted servers. That's when I turned to Jahari. Jahari was one of my youngest contractors, a bright kid who could rewire a house blindfolded and knew more about computers than I did about blueprints. He was like a surrogate son to me. When I pulled him aside at the job site and told him what Naima was doing, the look on his face wasn't pity. It was a grim, focused loyalty. "Eli," he said, his voice low so the other guys wouldn't hear. "If she's using the bank's resources and her personal phone to move money, she's leaving a trail. We just have to mirror it." It felt dirty. It felt like I was breaking the very vows I had taken 30 years ago. But then I remembered the smirk Naima gave me in the kitchen and the cold way she had gaslighted me about her work trip. The woman I married was already gone. The person in my house now was a stranger who was stealing my children's future. Jahari helped me set it all up. We didn't do anything fancy or loud. We went for invisible. He showed me how to install motion-activated cameras that looked like everyday household items. We put one in a decorative vase in the living room, and another that looked exactly like a smoke detector in the hallway. I bought a high-quality voice recorder, small enough to hide in my palm, and I started carrying it every time Naima entered the room. This app, Johari explained, tapping his tablet, will mirror her phone communications. Every text, every call log, every deleted message will go straight to an encrypted cloud server. If she's talking to the councilman, you're going to hear it. It was agonizing. For the next few weeks, I had to play the part of the oblivious husband. I had to sit across the dinner table from her, ask her how her day was, and listen to her tell more lies about meetings and bank audits. I had to let her pat my hand and tell me I was getting a bit slow, while I knew, right in my pocket, a recorder was capturing her every word. I felt like a spy in my own home. My skin crawled every time she touched me. I'd go to the job site during the day and sit in my truck, scrolling through the mirrored messages Johari had secured. It was like watching a slow-motion wreck of my own life. I saw her planning lunches with Dwight. I saw her laughing about how clueless I was. He actually believed the Charlotte story, she texted Dwight one afternoon. He's so focused on his little construction piles that he doesn't see the mountain moving right under him. Reading those words felt like a serrated blade across my heart. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed the financial paper trail. I needed to know exactly how much she had taken. In the construction world, you don't tear down a wall until you've secured the rest of the house. I was waiting, watching, and documenting. I was becoming the man she claimed I was, the quiet, forgetful Eli, all while I was building a digital gallows for her career and her reputation. I didn't want a shouting match. I wanted justice. And thanks to Johari, I was finally getting the tools to build it. The deeper we dug into the digital trail, the more the perfect life. I thought I had looked like a cheap stage set. Johari called me into his office late one Thursday. He didn't say much. He just pointed at the dual monitors. Eli, he said, his voice heavy. It's worse than we thought. She isn't just having an affair. She's gutting you. On the screen were bank statements from offshore accounts I never knew existed. Accounts in the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands. I watched the flow of money. Large sums, $20,000 here, $50,000 there, being transferred from my company's operating accounts into shell corporations. These corporations were tied to Councilman Dwight Hawkins's associates. But the biggest blow was the luxury condo. Naima and Dwight had co-purchased a $3 million penthouse in another state. It wasn't in their names. It was under a company called ND Holdings. N for Naima, D for Dwight. I looked at the dates. She had started moving this money the same month. She told me we couldn't afford the loan for the expansion of Vance & Sons. She had sat there, looked me in the eye, and told me my dream was too risky, while she was literally using my sweat and blood to buy a love nest for another man. I felt a physical sickness in my chest. This wasn't just a betrayal of the heart. It was a systematic execution of my legacy. My construction business, the thing I had built for my sons, was being bled dry to fund Naima's secret life of designer clothes and expensive jewelry. I didn't confront them. I needed more than just numbers on a screen. I needed their own voices to seal their fate. I needed proof that would be undeniable in a court of law. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering every scrap of evidence. Recorded phone calls where Naima spoke to Dwight with an intimacy she hadn't shown me in 20 years, photographs of them at upscale hotels, and the mirrored call logs that showed they spoke every single morning before I even woke up. One recording in particular stood out. It was Naima talking to her friend on her car's Bluetooth. She was laughing. Eli is so predictable, she said. He thinks he's so tough because he works with his hands, but he's as soft as butter. I've liquidated nearly 40% of the business assets already. By the time he realizes what's happening, there won't be enough left for him to hire a decent lawyer. I'll have the house, the penthouse, and Dwight. Eli will just have his hammer. Hearing her call me soft, after I had spent my life providing for her, was the final straw. The rage that simmered within me wasn't a hot, screaming anger. It was a cold, righteous fury. It was a controlled burn. I was no longer the husband. I was the accountant of her sins. I started organizing the files. Johari helped me timestamp every recording and categorize every bank transfer. We made 3 copies of everything. One for me, one for my new legal team, and one hidden in a safe that Naima didn't even know existed. I continued to play the role. I ate her dinner. I listened to her talk about the stress at the bank. I even smiled when she told me I should think about retiring early because I looked tired. She was trying to push me out of the way so she could finish the job. She thought she was the one in control, the VP of regional operations, the brilliant finance manager. She didn't realize that a builder knows exactly which stone to pull to make the whole structure come crashing down. I had the evidence. I had the truth. All I needed now was the right moment to let the world hear it. I was waiting for her to make her final move, and I knew it would be a big one. I just didn't realize it would happen while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. There is a specific kind of strength required to sit across from a person who is destroying you and act like you don't know. For months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Elijah Vance, the hardworking contractor. By night, I was a ghost in my own hallways, checking memory cards and backing up digital files. I was living in a house built on lies, and every floorboard felt like it was ready to snap. Naima was getting bolder. She didn't even try to hide the conferences anymore. She'd pack her bags right in front of me, humming a tune, while she prepared to spend the weekend at the penthouse my money had bought. She started talking to me like I was a child or a piece of furniture that was getting in her way. She'd leave her phone face down on the counter, thinking her biometric locks were enough to keep me out. She didn't realize Jahari had given me a digital key to her entire world. I remember one night she came home late, smelling like expensive wine and a cigar brand I knew Dwight Hawkins favored. She looked at me sitting there with my blueprints and actually laughed. "Still working on those little houses, Eli? You really should consider selling the firm. You're looking older every day, and honestly, the business is becoming a liability." I didn't yell. I didn't throw the evidence in her face. I just nodded and said, "I'm just trying to make sure the family is taken care of, Naima." Inside, I was a furnace of cold fury. I was watching her systematic execution of our marriage. She had already moved the title of 2 of our company trucks into a holding company. She was diverting the insurance payouts from a minor job site fired directly into an offshore account. She was a financial predator, and I was the prey she thought she had already caught. The hardest part was the kids. Marcus and Simone would come over for Sunday dinner, and I'd have to watch Naima play the role of the doting mother while she was actively stealing their inheritance. I wanted to scream the truth at them, but I knew I couldn't. If I moved too early, Naima and Dwight would use their influence to bury me. A councilman and a bank VP make for a powerful pair of enemies. I had to wait until the trap was so tight there was no room for them to wiggle out. I kept my records organized in a heavy-duty safe at a storage unit Naima didn't know about. Every recording was time-stamped. Every bank transfer was highlighted in red ink. I was building a case that wasn't just about a cheating wife. It was about a criminal conspiracy. I felt the weight of the betrayal every second of every day. It was like carrying a backpack full of lead. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. For 30 years, I had let her handle the complex things while I did the simple work. Now, I was the one with the blueprint for her destruction. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting and broken glass. Sometimes it comes quietly, with a signature on a document or a whispered plan in a dark restaurant. I was ready. I was just waiting for the final piece of the puzzle, the proof that Dwight was directly using my business assets for his political campaign. I was so close. I just didn't know that my own body was about to betray me before I could finish the job. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. It happened on a Tuesday, under a sky so blue it looked painted. I was on the site of our latest project, checking the framing on a 2-story residential build. I remember the smell of fresh-cut pine and the sound of the nail guns. Everything was normal until it wasn't. It started as a dull ache in my jaw, then a crushing pressure in my chest, like an invisible hand was squeezing my heart with everything it had. I tried to reach for my radio, but my arm felt like it was made of concrete. The world tilted, The blue sky turned gray, and the last thing I heard was Johari shouting my name before the ground rushed up to meet me. I woke up in a world of white lights and the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. My chest felt like it had been run over by one of my own dump trucks. The doctor told me it was a widowmaker heart attack. He said I was lucky Johari was there to start CPR, or I'd be in a box instead of a hospital bed. For the first 2 days, I was drifting in and out of a morphine haze. I saw my kids, Marcus and Simone. I saw their tear-streaked faces as they held my hands. But Naima was nowhere to be found. Marcus told me she was on an urgent business trip to the regional headquarters and was trying to catch the first flight back. I knew better. Even through the fog of the medication, I knew she was with him. She was probably celebrating. She probably thought the problem was finally solving itself. By the 3rd day, the haze cleared. I was weak, barely able to sit up, but my mind was sharp. I looked at the door every time it opened, waiting. I knew she'd come, not to check on my health, but to check on her investment. When Naima finally walked in on the 4th day, she wasn't wearing the face of a grieving wife. She was wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying a designer briefcase. She looked like she was walking into a boardroom, not a hospital room. Behind her was Ms. Imani Sterling, the lawyer I'd heard Naima whispering about on the recordings. The contrast was staggering. I was laying there in a thin hospital gown, pale and tethered to machines, and she was standing there looking like $1 million, money she'd stolen from me. She didn't kiss my forehead. She didn't ask how I felt. "Elijah," she said, her voice echoing in the sterile room. "The doctors say your recovery will be months, if not years. And the business, well, without you there to run it, the debts are piling up fast. We have to make some difficult decisions to save what's left." Ms. Sterling stepped forward, opening the briefcase. The sound of the latch clicking was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Mr. Vance, we've prepared some documents for your signature. To protect Naima's interests and ensure the creditors don't seize the family home, we're proposing a swift dissolution of the marriage and a transfer of assets." They thought I was a dying man. They thought the heart attack had wiped out my memory and my will to fight. Naima stood there with a small, predatory smile, watching her lawyer explain how I was going to be left with nothing but a medical bill and a broken business. They were serving me divorce papers while the EKG was still tracking my survival. But what they didn't know was that I had asked Johari to bring me a specific item from my storage unit the night before. I had it tucked right under my pillow. I let them talk. I let them show their true colors. I let them think this soft man was finally beaten. I waited until Ms. Sterling handed me a pen. That's when I decided to show them that my heart might have stumbled, but my resolve was stronger than ever. There is no sound quite as cold as the rustle of legal paper in a room where a man is fighting for his life. As I lay there, the steady beep of the monitor was the only thing proving I was still a part of this world, but Naima and her lawyer were already acting like I was a ghost. They didn't even look at me with pity. They looked at me as a hurdle, a final piece of paperwork that needed to be cleared away so they could claim the prize. "Elijah, please try to understand," Naima said, her voice dripping with a fake, practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. "The doctors say your stress levels are the primary cause of this. Carrying the weight of Vance and Sons is killing you. If you sign these papers, the house and the liquid assets move into my name. It shields us from the business liabilities. It's the only way to make sure I'm taken care of while you recover." Ms. Sterling, the lawyer, stepped closer. She had eyes like a shark, dark, vacant, and focused only on the kill. She laid the documents on my overbed table, right next to my plastic water pitcher and my heart medication. "To put it simply, Mr. Vance," the lawyer added, her tone sharp and dismissive, "you are no longer in a position to manage your affairs. The company is bleeding out, and the debts are mounting. By signing this voluntary dissolution and asset transfer, you're ensuring that your wife isn't dragged down with the ship. It's an equitable division, considering the circumstances." Equitable. That word felt like a hot iron against my skin. They wanted the house I'd paid off 20 years ago. They wanted the savings accounts, the retirement funds, and the remaining equity in my company. They wanted to leave me with a hospital bill and a one-way ticket to a state-funded nursing home. I looked at Naima. I looked for a spark of the woman I'd married in '88. I looked for the girl who laughed at the community fair. But all I saw was a vice president of regional operations who had run the numbers and decided her husband was an entry in the lost column. She stood there, checking her watch, probably wondering if she'd make it back to Dwight's penthouse in time for dinner. "Where are Marcus and Simone?" I asked, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. Naima sighed, an impatient sound. "I sent them to the cafeteria, Eli. They don't need to be part of the business side of this. It would only upset them. Just sign the papers so we can move forward." She actually leaned in and tried to place the pen in my hand. Her fingers were cold. She didn't realize that the man she thought was soft as butter had spent the last year hardening into steel. She thought my silence over the past few months was a sign of weakness, of a mind starting to fail. She didn't realize it was the silence of a builder waiting for the concrete to set. The humiliation of that moment was a physical weight. Being underestimated because of my age and my health was the final insult. They were talking about my life like I was already gone, treating me like a piece of equipment that had outlived its usefulness. But my heart, as damaged as it was still beating, and my mind was clearer than it had been in decades. I looked at the signature line. Elijah Vance. If I signed that, 30 years of labor would vanish into Dwight Hawkins's campaign fund and Naima's offshore accounts. I felt a surge of adrenaline that the doctors probably wouldn't have liked. I didn't take the pen. Instead, I let my hand drift toward the edge of the pillow, feeling for the cold, metallic casing of the device Jahari had smuggled in for me. I said, pausing to catch my breath, "that before I sign anything, we should talk about the debts you mentioned, Naima. And maybe we should talk about ND Holdings." The air in the room suddenly felt very, very still. Naima's hand, which had been reaching for her briefcase, stopped midair. The mask didn't fall immediately, but the cracks appeared. Her eyes darted toward Ms. Sterling, then back to me. The smug, predatory look flickered for just a second, replaced by a sharp, jagged confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about, Eli," she said, her voice a bit higher than before. "You're confused. The medication is making you imagine things. This is exactly why we need to get these papers signed. You aren't thinking clearly." Ms. Sterling cleared her throat, trying to regain the upper hand. "Mr. Vance, let's not make this difficult. We are trying to protect your interests. Any delay only puts the family home at further risk." I almost laughed, but it hurt my ribs too much. "Protect my interests? Like you protected the $100,000 you moved to the Bahamas last month, Naima? Or the way you're protecting the equity in my trucks by shifting it into shell companies?" Naima's face went from pale to a ghostly white. She stepped back from the bed as if I'd suddenly become contagious. "Eli, stop this. You're talking nonsense. You don't have any idea how the bank's internal restructuring works. You're just a contractor. You've never understood the high-level finances." That was her favorite weapon, my simple mind. She'd used it for years to keep me from looking too closely at the books. She'd used it to keep me in the dark while she and Dwight built their kingdom on my back. She truly believed that because I worked with my hands, I couldn't possibly track a digital paper trail. "You're right, Naima," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. "I am just a contractor. And a contractor knows when a load-bearing wall has been tampered with. I might not know your high-level bank jargon, but I know how to read a mirrored call log. And I definitely know how to listen." I saw Ms. Sterling's professional composure start to crumble. She wasn't a shark anymore. She was a lawyer who realized she'd walked into a room where the rules had changed. She looked at Naima, seeking an explanation, but Naima was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She thought she had the perfect plan. She thought the hospital was the best place to trap me because I was physically tethered to a bed. She thought my children were safely tucked away in the cafeteria. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. I let the silence hang there for a moment, heavy and suffocating. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own choices. I wanted her to realize that the clueless husband she'd been mocking to her lover for the last 12 months had been sitting in the front row of her performance the entire time. "You thought I was soft," I whispered, looking her straight in the eye. You thought I was too old to fight back. But a builder knows that you don't win a fight with a hammer. You win it with the truth. I slowly pulled the digital recorder from under my pillow and held it up. It was small, black, and held the power to incinerate her entire world. I didn't press play yet. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to know that the trap wasn't for me. It was for her. Now, I said, before we discuss your equitable division, let's listen to what you and Dwight really think about my condition. The silence in the hospital room was so thick you could have cut it with a trowel. Naima stood frozen, her eyes glued to the small black recorder in my hand, as if it were a live grenade. Miss Sterling had stopped shuffling papers altogether. I didn't wait for them to find their voices. I pressed play. The speaker wasn't large, but in that sterile, quiet room, Naima's voice sounded like a thunderclap. Darling Dwight. The recording began. It was a call from 3 weeks ago. Naima's voice was light, playful, a tone she hadn't used with me since the 90s. I've transferred another 100,000 to the Bahamas account. Eli is so clueless, honestly. He thinks he's expanding his business, but all his assets are practically liquidated for our new life. The hospital stay is a godsend, really. He's too weak to fight me now. Once the divorce is final, we'll be set. Free and clear. Naima's face didn't just turn pale, it turned a sickly shade of gray. She reached out toward the bed, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to snatch the device, but she was paralyzed by the sound of her own betrayal. I didn't stop there. I scrolled to the next file. This one was from the hidden camera in the living room. You could hear the clink of wine glasses. I'm worried he's starting to ask questions about the utility bills, Naima's voice said on the tape. Then came the smooth, arrogant baritone of Councilman Dwight Hawkins. Let him ask. The man is a dinosaur, Naima. He's a relic. By the time he figures out the math, we'll be watching the sunset from the penthouse while he's still trying to find his reading glasses. He's served his purpose. He built the bank account, and now we're going to spend it. At that exact moment, the door pushed open. Marcus and Simone walked in, carrying a tray of soup and some magazines. They stopped dead. The audio was still playing. A particularly nasty clip where Naima laughed about how easy it was to manipulate poor old Eli. My children's faces went from confusion to a horror so deep it broke my heart all over again. Simone dropped the tray. The sound of the plastic bowl hitting the floor was the only thing that broke the spell. Mom, Marcus whispered. The word was full of 1,000 questions, but Naima couldn't answer a single one. She looked at her children, then at me, then at her lawyer. The vice president was gone. The iron fist was gone. She was just a woman caught in a web of her own making. I looked at Miss Sterling. Is this the part where you tell me these are inadmissible? Because my associate Jahari has the original, encrypted files, the metadata, and the sworn statements from the bank tellers who flagged the suspicious transfers you helped facilitate. The lawyer didn't say a word. She gathered her briefcase, not even looking at Naima. She knew a losing hand when she saw one. This isn't just a divorce, Naima, I said, my voice cold and steady. This is embezzlement. This is grand larceny. This is a conspiracy to defraud. I have every text, every mirrored call, and every cent accounted for. I didn't just watch you. I documented you. I built a case with the same precision I used to build our home. Naima finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. Eli, please, it's not what it sounds like. I was just scared about the business failing. The business was failing because you were stealing the blood from its veins. I barked, the strength of my voice surprising even me. You weren't scared. You were greedy. You saw a man who worked 40 years to give you everything, and you decided it wasn't enough. You wanted the man, the money, and the house, and you wanted me in a grave so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about it. I looked at my kids. Marcus was shaking, his fists clenched at his sides. Simone was crying silently, looking at her mother like she was a monster. That was the real cost of Naima's new life. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had incinerated the respect of her own children. I'm not signing your papers, Naima, I said, tossing the pen across the room. But you're going to sign mine. My legal team has prepared a different set of documents. It's called a full confession and a voluntary restitution of all diverted assets. If you sign, I might not hand these recordings to the district attorney and the ethics committee today. If you don't, Dwight Hawkins will be out of a job by noon, and you'll be trading that navy suit for an orange jumpsuit by dinner. The predatory gleam was gone from her eyes. The smirk was buried under the weight of the truth. Justice had finally arrived in room 402, and it didn't need a gavel. It just needed a man who was tired of being underestimated. The following week was a blur of high-stakes meetings, but this time, I wasn't the one being interrogated. With Jahari's digital evidence and the mountain of financial records I'd secured, Naima's defense didn't just crumble, it vanished. Her equitable division was laughed out of the room by my new attorneys. Once they saw the proof of the offshore accounts and the ND Holdings penthouse, the conversation shifted from who gets the house to how many years of prison is Naima facing. In the end, she had no choice. To avoid the criminal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud, Naima had to sign over everything. The house, the savings, her own retirement funds. Every cent she had tried to siphon away was returned to the Vance and Sons accounts. The luxury penthouse was put up for immediate sale, with the proceeds going directly into a trust for Marcus and Simone. Councilman Dwight Hawkins didn't fare much better. The recordings of him mocking the citizens and discussing the use of shell companies to hide assets were leaked, not by me, but by a concerned citizen who happened to have access to the cloud. His political career ended in a flurry of resignations and public disgrace within 48 hours. Naima moved out in the middle of the night. She couldn't face the neighbors, and she certainly couldn't face our children. Marcus and Simone haven't spoken to her since that day in the hospital. They realized that the woman who raised them was a mask, and the person underneath was someone they didn't know at all. I sat in my office at the job site a month later, looking at the fresh blueprints for the expansion Naima said I couldn't afford. My heart was healing, the doctors said, partly because the weight I had been carrying wasn't just physical, it was the stress of living with a liar. I didn't feel joy in her ruin. I just felt peace. I had protected my legacy. I had shown my sons that a man's value isn't in his bank account, but in his integrity. Naima thought she was playing a game of chess while I was playing a game of checkers. She forgot that in construction, if you pull the wrong stone, the whole thing comes down on your head. She wanted a new life. Well, she got one. But it didn't include my house, my money, or my name. I was Elijah Vance, and I was still standing. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, with paperwork. It's been 6 months since I walked out of that hospital, and the air in my home finally feels easy to breathe. The designer bags are gone. The floral perfume has faded, and the silence is no longer heavy with lies. It's just peace. I spent my life building houses. But this last year taught me that the most important structure you'll ever maintain is your own self-respect. Naima thought my age made me a victim. She thought my calloused hands meant I had a dull mind. She was so busy looking at the simple man she married that she forgot that a man who knows how to build also knows how to take things apart. Vance and Sons is thriving now. Marcus is taking on more leadership, and Simone is finishing her degree with a trust fund that her mother can't touch. We're a family again, though we're smaller than we used to be. The cracks have been filled, not with the rot of the past, but with a new kind of strength that only comes after a storm. I sometimes think about Naima, living in a small apartment on the edge of town, working a low-level job because no bank will touch a VP with a record of financial irregularities. I don't hate her. Hate is too much work for a man with a healing heart. I just feel a quiet sort of pity. She traded a 30-year legacy and the love of her children for a penthouse she never got to live in and a man who disappeared the second the money ran dry. Justice, it seems, has a heartbeat after all. It's the steady, rhythmic sound of a life being lived with the truth. I'm 64 years old, and for the first time, I'm not just building for the future. I'm actually enjoying the present. I've learned that you're never too old to take your power back. You just have to be willing to wait, to watch, and to keep the receipts. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback, it's about peace. And if this story touched you, Subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone, and your one click might help them find it. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted them earlier, or waited like I did? Let me know in the comments.